For decades, people have dreamed of robots with an intelligence like our own. Now the scientists say they've never been so close to turning dream into reality.
Today we have about 10 million artificial neurons, or brain cells, that we can put in these machines. By the year 2000, we expect to have about 1 billion.
But while some say they will offer unlimited possibilities in our service, others warn they may become our masters.
Should we let these machines take over? Or should human beings remain the dominant species, or what?
Just how close are we to the creation of artificial intelligence, to machines which have a mind of their own? That's our story tonight.
From Sydney, the ABC's Lateline. Here's Maxine McKew.
Welcome to the program. Throughout history, human beings have had two major recurring obsessions: what's out there in space and what's inside our heads. Ironically, the two obsessions may now be linked. Scientists are now certain that the only way we can explore the universe is to create an intelligent humanoid that can travel the vast distances and return to Earth to tell us all about what they found. To do that, scientists have to create a form of artificial intelligence with the abilities of a human brain. Now, if this sounds like a bad joke, it isn't. Next year, NASA will send an intelligent robot to Mars to walk across the uncharted terrain of the planet, photographing and collecting mineral samples, then returning to Earth. And this, we're told, is just the beginning. Right now, billions of dollars are being spent trying to perfect computers and robots that will perhaps control many parts of our lives. But how far can this go? The scientists say the human brain will in time be replicated. What they can't agree on are the consequences. Will these machines have consciousness? Will they demand rights? And could they perhaps threaten their makers, all of us? In just a few minutes, we'll talk with two people at the cutting edge of artificial intelligence research. But first, Fiona Clark reports on the world of AI.
Or you will be exterminated. It is the doctor.
Talking. Walking.
Where do we dig?
Oh, the robot's going to tell us that.
Friend and foe. The computer age has given science fiction writers fertile ground for producing robots with human-like intelligence.
Danger! Danger!
So far, fiction has outstripped reality for the simple reason that scientists can't yet build an artificial intelligence even close to human capability. But that hasn't stopped them trying.
I foresee a future in which the robot industries expand off Earth and into the solar system and beyond, growing ever more powerful and doing things ever less related to their roots back on Earth, with Earth becoming a kind of backwater, a game preserve, where biological human beings still live and still imagine they're important.
The human mind, the human soul, is a computer program being run on a wet computer called the human brain. That's in essence what a human being is. Now, what in principle you could do is scan the pattern, see what sort of information is coded in the neurons, and transfer it into a computer. You could also transfer the entire, make a perfect copy of the human body, transfer that as a simulation inside a computer.
I'm so pretty. Don't you like me?
Scenarios like these are at least half a century away. So far, the biggest challenge between man and machine has been Deep Blue, the chess machine that beat Grandmaster Garry Kasparov earlier this year. Kasparov said he was surprised by the human-like decisions Deep Blue made in its game. But for many scientists, Deep Blue is just the beginning.
Well, today we have about 10 million artificial neurons, or brain cells, that we can put in these machines. By the year 2000, we expect to have about 1 billion. That's our goal. So by the time we get into middle of 21st century, we will easily have far more cells than we certainly have in the human brain.
Hugo de Garis is a brain builder. He sees a time when every affluent household will have a domestic robot, preferably without the glitches.
Robot repairs.
Creating human-like intelligence is no easy task and has seen the artificial intelligence industry branch out in a number of different directions. At the moment, medical science is still trying to come to terms with exactly how our brain functions. We know electrical impulses are passed along neural pathways as we think and send messages to the rest of our body. So one branch of AI has replicated this system with a series of neural networks, or on-off switches, that mimic the brain's electrical activity. It's hoped that these systems will be able to learn just like a child. Meet Stumpy. He's one example of this kind of bottom-up learning. Developed by PhD students at the University of New South Wales, Stumpy has been given a task: to walk. He knows his end goal, but has to teach himself how to get there by trial and error, in much the same way as a toddler would learn. On the other side of the Pacific, researchers at MIT are working on another kind of evolutionary robot, COG. Its developer, Rodney Brooks, hopes one day he'll be able to hold a conversation with his creation. But there are others in the field of artificial intelligence who believe that this kind of bottom-up AI is a long way from being functional. Their preference is for a top-down system, one where the information is programmed in, continually building the machine's knowledge base, much like this system used at the Aeronautical and Maritime Research Laboratory in Melbourne. It's called Swarm, and it tests the capabilities of Australia's air defence systems. While it looks like any other simulation program, it's been set up to act like real pilots, often flying under the pressure of combat. The artificial pilot has goals and a series of plans he calls up at random in response to his changing environment. Its decisions are rapid, imitating gut reactions and human reasoning.
There's a richness in human behaviour which it's very important to represent in any simulation model. And so that's where the difference currently is really between current models which have very limited repertoire of behaviour and artificial intelligence ones which can have a very rich behavioural library.
For researchers like Paul Compton and Claude Sammet, systems like these are extensions of the human brain, expert aids.
What I'd like to see AI is, if you like, not AI but IA, an intelligence amplifier, that this sort of technology supports the user.
The survivors of the nuclear fire lived only to face a new nightmare, the war against the machines.
But what of the future? Will machines, as they become more and more intelligent and perhaps develop their own consciousness, always be our friends? Hugo de Garis is one researcher who believes the Terminator concept is not just science fiction, but a possible future reality.
I believe next century's global politics will be dominated by this issue of species dominance. Should we let these machines take over, or should human beings remain the dominant species, or what? My scenario for late 21st century is rather negative. I see the potential for warfare between two camps, one saying human beings should be dominant, and the other camp saying that, no, this is a religion, this is magnificent, this is godlike, let's create the next superior species. And I see bitter conflict between these two groups.
He fears the pro-development group will win, and that one day the machines will turn on their human makers, and we will come off second best.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
Believing that machines will evolve their own consciousness and then, like Hal in 2001, A Space Odyssey, develop a sense of self-preservation, de Garis thinks society should start to consider the future ramifications of artificial intelligence. But for now, scientists in the field hope that their work will actually help us gain a better understanding of our own consciousness.
I can see you're really upset about this.
In trying to build a system that is intelligent, we learn something about our own intelligence. and it might help us to understand our own nature of consciousness and things like that.
Let's hope he's right.
Hasta la vista, baby.
That report from Fiona Clark, and now to our studio guests. Professor Rodney Brooks is Associate Director of the Artificial Intelligence Lab at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's the father of COG, a humanoid artificially intelligent robot, and he joins us tonight from Cairns. Dr. Doug Lenat is a leading expert on artificial intelligence. As president of PsyCorp, he's the father of Psych, a powerful computer program able to think and reason for itself, and he joins us tonight from Austin, Texas. Dr. David Chalmers is Professor of Philosophy at the University of California. In his recent book, The Conscious Mind, he argues that machines can achieve consciousness, and he joins us tonight from San Francisco. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well,
Rodney Brooks, as the father of COG, what is it up to these days? Now, and I say it because it is genderless, is that right?
yeah, COG is a humanoid-shaped robot. Has no legs, but it's got a human body from the hips up, only one arm right now, and it has no gender because we're not putting those sorts of behaviors into the system, and we're trying to make it be able to do the sorts of things a small child will do up through the age of perhaps 2 years.
And if you were to walk into your lab, say now, what sorts of things might you expect it to be doing?
Well, on any given day when we're doing a run, you see the robot sitting there looking at things that go by, so when it sees someone come into the room, it will swing its head over and watch the person as they move about. If you go up to it and move something around in front of it, then it will reach out for that thing and maybe start taking turns with the person in a little play activity on the table in front of it, just picking things up and putting things down. Nothing very complicated at the moment.
Now, the whole point of this is that you want COG to learn the way an infant does, is that right?
Yeah, we're interested in sort of recapitulating child development in order to understand better how it is that people are put together by trying to take all the theories that are floating around, implement them as we can, and see how they break down and see what else needs to be looked at in the human area to find out how people work.
And its human form is quite important so that it can, physically interact with the world?
Yeah, there's two reasons we gave it a human form. One is so that it has the same sorts of bodily experiences that we have when we interact with the world, because I think it's important that any understanding of the world be grounded out in something, and I think with people it's grounded out in their sensory motor interactions. So that's one reason. The other reason is so that people will interact with it as they interact with other people, because that's a big part of what it is to be human, the social skills that we learn right from day one of how it is to interact with other people. And because COG looks like a human, people naturally interact with it like a human. They can't help themselves.
And you're expecting eventually that sort of response to come back from COG, or perhaps one of its successors?
Well, we're hoping with COG to get some of that sort of response back, and are starting to see a little bit of that. It'll be a while and many generations before we get to the full level of human interaction that we're hoping for.
And now what would that be? What do you see as the ultimate capacity here? I mean, do you want an android like a Data on the Starship Enterprise, something like that?
Oh, certainly. Data is my inspiration in this, and that's the ultimate that I want.
Why is it you believe then that biological structures, really hold the key to this whole area of artificial intelligence?
Well, certainly biological structures are an existence proof, and by studying them we may come up with an intelligence if we can emulate it. Another approach would be to forget about biology and just try and do things from first principles, but the danger is there. We might come up with something that's totally alien and we'll never fully be able to relate to it and understand it, because its grounding, its experiences in the world may be totally alien to us.
Now, Doug Lenat, this is a very different approach from the one you take. I mean, is this because you're not interested in this parenting approach?
No, not at all. In fact, about 20 years ago, I was trying to do exactly the same sorts of things that Rod is now, and I kept hitting a brick wall. And the brick wall was that learning occurs at the fringe of what the organism already knows. So the good way of thinking of that is if you know a lot, you can learn a lot, and quickly. But the downside is if you don't know very much at all, it's a very slow road to follow. And so finally, after a decade of hitting that brick wall, we decided it would just be faster to tell the system the millions of things it needs to get up to the toddler level that Rod wants his system to evolve to automatically. And I think from there on, both of us agree that the main activity it would engage in is communicating with people, reading, having conversations, and learning on its own from that point on.
Now tell me how you've done that. I mean, how have you got psych to the stage where it can make, say, discerning judgments and avoid a lot of the simple errors that computers often do?
Well, we've taken both a bottom-up and a top-down approach. The bottom-up approach is take a look at snippets of text you'd find in a newspaper story, in an advertisement, in a headline, in a magazine, in a novel. And for each piece of text, we ask ourselves, what did the writer of that assume that the reader already knew about the world? What questions should anybody be able to answer, having just read that little bit of text? And if our program doesn't know that, then we give our program, the psych system, that piece of knowledge. And we just keep iterating again and again and again until it gets more and more of those questions right. And the top-down approach is take some area that the system doesn't know too much about, like clothing or preparing a meal, and decide what are the important collections, the important relationships, the important facts that every sane person knows about that topic, and then represent those so that the system knows it.
So you're giving the machine
giving it
common sense, is that right?
Absolutely. Think of this as consensus knowledge, things which are so fundamental that you just assume that perfect strangers you meet on the street already know these things.
So is psych at the point of being commercially useful?
Yes, we're just at the point where we've spun out of the consortium that we developed the system in for its first decade of life, and are now finding the first commercial applications in areas like helping people find information across the World Wide Web, integrating databases, sanity checking the requests that people make of application programs, and communicating in natural language rather than having to program in dealing with application programs.
Now, Rodney Brooks, isn't this an easier approach than what you're attempting?
Oh, it's much less fun. I've got robots that move around and I can interact with. My worry in that approach is that although obviously it leads to direct applications and useful applications and will be a great boon in many sorts of software engineering enterprises, my worry is that the system doesn't have a deep understanding because nothing ever is able to ground out. It's like having just a dictionary, and when you want to find out what a word means, you get a sentence in English and there are other words that you have to look up in the dictionary again, and there's no stopping that infinite regress.
Okay, do we want a machine, though, with deep understanding?
Well, if I want to really understand how it is that humans work, then I want to build a machine that is a human in the sense that it becomes indistinguishable from human eventually.
There's a revolutionary concept.
Well, it's been...
Rod,
Sorry, Doug Lenat, are you just making a dictionary?
No, I think that we need to distinguish two different senses of what Rod was just talking about with this notion of deep understanding. There is the deep experience of feeling emotions, of feeling conscious, of feeling desires. And then there is the kind of deep understanding that means you can answer questions about it, you can act as if you understand these things. And what we definitely give our program is a deep understanding of emotions and human motivations, because it needs that in order to make sense out of what it reads in the newspaper, what it hears people asking it.
So,
Yeah,
Rodney Brooks, what are you talking about then? Something beyond that?
Well, I think that it boils down to if you want to talk to someone about a failure in your love life, you'd like to talk to someone who's been in love so that they can understand what you're talking about, rather than someone who's just read books about it and has no experience themselves. And that's the difference.
I don't think I'd want to talk to a machine about it.
Well, actually, let me ask you that, Rodney Brooks. I mean, you said just a minute ago, I mean, you're not just interested in making a machine that is human-like, but one that is human. And now, by that you mean a machine that has, what, subjective feelings, has a sense of self?
Eventually. And I'm not claiming that we're going to get there in the short term by any means, but that is our long-term intellectual goal. And that may be beyond my own lifetime.
I'd have to say why. I mean, well, it's one thing to have, say, computers that can do things much more efficiently, say, than we can, but why would you recreate us?
In order to understand us better.
David Chalmers, is that a good idea?
I think we all want to understand ourselves, so the question is what these systems are telling us about ourselves and about the human mind. I think if you look at the work which Rod and Doug have been doing so far, they've got the potential to tell us a lot about what you might call human intelligence, how it is that we behave, how it is that we can function and respond and have conversations in the world. They're still primitive so far, but give them enough time and they seem to be shedding a little bit of light on those questions.
Do you also accept that, do you also accept that, say, a machine like COG or could develop an inner life and all that that means?
Well, that's a really interesting question and the deep question, human consciousness. Because we're not just, in a sense, giant androids who can respond to the world and talk to the world and hold conversations. There's something going on the inside as well. We have subjective experiences and thoughts and sensations. In a sense, that's what gives our lives meaning. And that's the most interesting fact about ourselves. So the really interesting question about machines is whether they're, in a sense, going to be sentient beings in that way as well, whether they can have their own consciousness.
Indeed, I mean...
And so far, the kind of work...
Sorry, go on.
So far, the kind of work which Rod and Doug are doing, I think their machines are showing signs of intelligence so far. Are they yet showing signs of consciousness? I'm not sure.
Well, if we accept this, that one day, you know, a machine could have an inner life, I mean, surely a COG or a machine like that could turn around to Rodney Brooks and say, look, in response to a command, sorry, I don't feel like it today. I mean, do you accept that that could be a possibility? Is that where the logic of this leads us?
Right, indeed. I think that right now we're not even within 50 or 100 years of that happening. If we move to sophisticated enough systems with about 100, 150, 200 years down the track, we'll get to the stage where we can hold conversations with these machines about their own consciousness. That may give us reasons to believe that they are in fact conscious. Right now, I think all we have is machines which can respond to the world and which can deal with the world, which can perceive the world, but there's nothing which is going on inside.
Doug Lenat, do you care whether a machine has a consciousness or not?
No, and I think that's really the fundamental difference between myself and Rod and David, which is that what we're interested in building the psych system is to produce artifacts that amplify human intelligence, the same way that physics and engineering amplify our physical selves, the same way that biology and medicine amplify our physiological selves. We want to build tools and artifacts that make us think faster, solve problems better, be able to cope with emergencies better, remember things better, and in all ways be a little smarter than if we didn't have those kinds of tools. And whether they're conscious or not is not of any great interest to me.
Rodney Brooks, you take quite a different view. That's not enough for you, is it?
No, well, I certainly agree with Doug that those are interesting things to do, and I do a lot of those sorts of tool-building things myself. But I'm also interested in this additional question of what it is to be human, and eventually it does get down to this question of consciousness, as David points out, and it's not something that any of our systems at the moment seem to exhibit. And I think David feels that maybe we're missing something in our understanding of consciousness, and I'm of the opinion that maybe we're not missing something, so we disagree a little bit there.
Okay. David, let me... sorry, Doug?
Oh, and I don't think that appearing to be conscious gives much insight into what's really consciousness all about. Psych, even 6 or 7 years ago, was asking questions like, are there other computer programs that work on our project? If not, why not? And has its own representation of its own goals and requests that it's given are just treated like other goals and given a priority, and very often it decides not to do something it was asked to do for a while because it's off pursuing its other goals. Is it conscious? I wouldn't say so. But again, what matters is if it's doing something useful, not if it feels conscious.
Rodney Brooks?
I think I agree with Doug that psych is not conscious. Also, COG is not conscious by any means right now.
No, no. David Chalmers, let me go back to the point of machines possibly having an inner life. That being the case, let's look at some of the ramifications. If a machine has an inner life, does it potentially have rights?
Indeed, but you have to start to worry what's going to happen. I mean, you program your machine, you have a conversation with it. Can you turn it off at night? Can you press the quit button on the menu, or are you then murdering the machine? When you turn it on again in the morning, are you bringing a new life into existence? Once we in a sense, you can see why Rod and Doug are taking the safe path by pursuing the engineering approach in the first place. Let's just get something that functions and not worry whether it's conscious, because that doesn't raise the scary questions. But I think what makes artificial intelligence really fascinating is that it holds out the hope that we're actually going to have a race, in a sense, of sister beings with whom we can converse and commingle as sentient beings. That raises the prospect, though, of perhaps a more serious form of racism than we've ever seen to date. We have the human
indeed
species
competing
and the machine
rights.
species coexisting.
Competing rights.
Indeed.
Yeah,
Right. Especially, I think, if we take the Rod Brooks route, which is to build robots interacting with us in the world. After a while, they're going to start competing with us for resources. We're living in the same world, after all. And you can see pretty serious consequences there.
Could you see?
Maybe this is, in a sense...
I was just going to say, could you see conflict, potentially? This is what Hugo Garis says.
And once you have beings coexisting in the same world, competing for some of the same resources, for the same kind of space, then there is the potential for conflict, which is why I think there's something interesting about maybe something closer to Doug's approach, which is building machines that function in virtual realities inside the computer, so to speak, rather than outside the computer. Then if computers gradually develop intelligence in their own simulated reality, we'll get to the point perhaps where they can be master of their own virtual worlds, and we'll be masters of ours. And the potential for conflict won't be there in the same way.
Now, Rodney Brooks, how do you see this?
Oh, I agree that there is a potential danger a long way down the line. You know, the last time there were two humanoid races on the Earth, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, only one survived. I don't see that as a problem that's going to be with us in the short term, and I think we've got much bigger problems with some of the DNA technologies where we'll have mixtures of machines and biological material in the shorter term from other lines of work that will have to be dealt with before we get to this longer-term problem.
Sure, but the longer-term problem, I mean, potentially, the servant could become the master?
Perhaps. I mean, there's been lots of science fiction stories written about that over time. People have speculated.
Doug Lenat?
Yeah, Maxine, I think that you're, if anything, underestimating the impact that this is going to have, although you're overestimating the danger. If you think back to primitive cavemen, before the advent of language, we say, well, they weren't really human, were they? Then language got developed, and it had such a profound impact that it changed what we even think of as being human. And I think having these intelligent machines be our partners and be our electronic servants is going to have that profound an impact on every aspect of our lives in the coming century.
So you see, say, a happy coexistence?
We don't think of language as a threat to human beings. We think of language as part of what it means to be human. And I think as the centuries roll by, having these machine partners will become part of what it means to be a human being.
David Chalmers, how do you see this question? I mean, are we going to have to redefine what it means to be human as more and more of these things come online?
Well, I think there are serious questions here. I mean, once we get to the point, say you have a machine which is as smart as us, then maybe 10 years later we get a little bit better at programming. The machine is just a little bit smarter than us. Then that machine in turn is probably going to be a better programmer than us. It's going to be able to build a better machine than we can. So it'll build a smarter machine yet. This gets into an ongoing spiral. So my feeling is that once we get to the point where a machine is as smart as us, the point where machines are thousands of times smarter than us is not going to be so far off in the future.
Okay,
so
does this mean we're all looking at having a big identity crisis in 50 years, feeling very insecure?
Maybe it's not 50 years, maybe it's 200 years, but I think at some point we're going to have to sit down as a species and say, do we want this to happen? Maybe we want this to happen. Maybe we're happy to be the next step in evolution to a race of 1,000 times smarter machines. Maybe we don't want that to happen, in which case there's going to be a real, Pandora's box, which we're just going to have to try to keep closed.
Yeah, but now you did mention something that was fascinating before. You mentioned, I think, machines and DNA in the same sentence. Now, what were you referring to there?
Well, as we're getting better understandings of biochemistry and able to manipulate biological material and DNA, we can see ways in which in the future computation might be done with DNA. There have been a few papers published over the last couple of years where DNA systems have been turned into little computers. And as that work progresses, we're going to see a mixture of computation and biological material and biological material starting to blend in with machines in a way that could be quite frightening for us.
So you're talking about some sort of Darwinian evolutionary process with the machines. Is that right?
Not necessarily Darwinian, it's probably more likely Lamarckian evolutionary progress where we as engineers manipulate it. But certainly that's a direction that a lot of people are thinking about and moving towards.
Doug Lenat?
Yes, I think that that kind of evolution is inevitable, and eventually we will cross the boundary where silicon is not the medium of computation anymore, but some type of organic molecules are.
David Chalmers, you thinking about this one?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at how we got here, I mean, if you're asking the question, how do you achieve artificial intelligence, you have to say, how did human intelligence got here? We got here by evolution, it seems, through natural selection. It seems to me that this offers an awfully promising metaphor for thinking about how we're going to achieve artificial intelligence as well. It may be that we're, in a sense, too dumb to program a computer which is as smart as we are from scratch, with a billion lines of with a billion lines of code. Whereas this kind of evolutionary programming, which Rod is alluding to, offers the hope that we can, in a sense, set up an evolutionary system. You know, you start with a big pool of dumb organisms, maybe which are coded up with big genetic strings in the form of bits. Set these going, have them combine and recombine and mutate with survival of the fittest. Eventually, these machines get smarter and smarter, and you start to go somewhere interesting. People have actually started to do this in recent technology. Right now, it's very primitive what these can do. They get fairly good at playing a game of drafts, maybe, or at writing down a certain bunch of sentences or some such. But if the technology is exploited in the right open-ended way, I mean, it holds out the promise that we just set up the system and let evolution do its bit.
To the point where
at the other end.
Okay, but to the point where we become the dinosaurs of the future.
Well, if we're smart enough at the way we do the programming, then I guess that's the danger. I guess what we want to do is sit there and look at how this evolutionary system that we're programming is handling itself, and how smart these machines are getting. I mean, right now we're just not even anywhere close. Maybe in 100 years' time, but right now our machines exhibit maybe the intelligence of an earwig. Maybe in 50 years' time they'll exhibit the intelligence of a dog, and in 100 years' time they'll exhibit the intelligence of a chimpanzee. Then we have to start to worry.
Okay, just a little bit closer than that. Doug Lenat, what do you see over, say, the next 10, 20 years? What are we looking at, do you think, feasibly in terms of artificial intelligence then, in the short term?
I think that the program that we've been building, and by the way, if people want to take a look at some of that technology, our web page is www.cyc.com. And they can take a look at some of what we've been working on. But even just what our program is able to do is just at the crossover point, just at the point where it's able to use its knowledge to help us educate it. It's able to disambiguate the various kinds of things that we say to it. It's able to guess and fill in gaps in things we haven't yet said to it. And I think as we cross that point, which we're right at today, we will see an explosion in which it will be learning, not through evolution, because of course, David, we didn't learn the things we know by discovering them ourselves. We learned the things we know by going to school, by having people talk to us, by watching television and so on. And so we're right at the point where we're able to start educating the system. As soon as we get a little bit past this point, we will find the system able to help with all manner of everyday activities that we currently wish we had an assistant for, helping us find information, helping us remind us of things, helping us check the things that we've said and the things that we've done online.
Okay, on that point, gentlemen, I'll have to say thank you very much. We are out of time, but good luck in, I suppose, going boldly where no man's gone before. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Maxine.
Well, that's all from Lateline for this week. Until next week, good night.
Friday.
It was true that people adored
Elvis Presley. They never wanted to know what his opinion was.
But the new stars would become the social conscience for a generation. Dancing in the Street, the history of rock and roll.